Hi golfers, Rob Cheney here from GOLFTEC Singapore. In today's video, we're going to discuss the topic of fairway woods and hybrids. It's a conversation and a topic I get asked about a lot, so I thought it was about time to do a video on the subject. And we're going to share with you a little secret using the stack and tilt grid that could transform the way you play these clubs. Okay, let's start out on the mat, just running through some pieces here as to help you understand ball position and a little bit of this grid diagram that's down on the mat. If you're not familiar with the grid and the previous videos and discussions we've had about this diagram that's on the mat, I'd really encourage you to go back and watch some of the original grid videos that I've made, because it will explain this concept in more detail than I will have time to go into in this video. I'll give you some basic understanding of it, but if you want to understand it in a bit more detail, I'm going to link the grid videos, the original grid videos, in the description below. This video today actually came about because I played golf with a student on Friday, and we'd had some discussions around this diagram and how he could help him on the golf course. And having taken another lesson this morning, we really started to help him improve these two clubs in particular, the hybrid and the fairway wood, that he just was not comfortable hitting from the ground. And that might sound familiar to many of you. These clubs are probably the hardest clubs to hit from the ground. Certainly the fairway woods become the most difficult because it's got the longest shaft. It's the longest club we hit from the ground, because we generally aren't going to be hitting our driver from the ground. The longest club that we hit from the ground with the least amount of loft, generally speaking, as well. So all of those factors combine to mean that unless you have your swing in a good place, controlling this club and the sweet spot and the path and the low point and all of the other things that you have to manage, all of the other radius management points that you have to conform to when you're hitting a 7-iron or a pitching wedge, everything just becomes more magnified when it comes to these longer clubs. And putting the ball in the wrong position can put you behind the 8 ball to start with. You can really be struggling if you don't get the ball position correct when you're trying to use these clubs. So if we start with the driver, just for the purpose of helping us understand the center of the swing or the low point of the swing, that is going to be directly under a golfer's lead shoulder. Very often ball position conversations happen around position relative to your feet, and whilst that's quite a useful visual for many of you, it's not really an accurate way of describing it, because it doesn't really have anything to do with where you position the ball relative to your feet. It's where you position it relative to this lead shoulder, which is the center of the swing. So at setup, most people would correctly prescribe the driver to be positioned underneath the lead shoulder. Okay, and I'd go along with that certainly as a starting point. If you wanted to hit different type or different shape of shot, we could certainly move the ball around, and with the ball being teed up with the driver, it's the club that allows us to have it the furthest forward, because we don't have to deal with quite so much of that control of the contact with the ground. So the lead shoulder, or the inside of the lead heel, left instep, if you want to use the foot as a reference, just be careful, it's not always the foot, because you can have people who have got wider stance where the lead shoulder is now no longer under that lead heel, and people can have narrower stances where again the lead shoulder is now outside of my left heel. So just be careful on that one, but for the most part, left shoulder, lead shoulder, lead heel is generally speaking about right for the driver. As we move back now, using the golf balls on the ground here as our reference, I'll call the driver ball position 0. Okay, so that's sitting right on the tangent of the circle, right at the point here underneath my lead shoulder. And as I start to move backwards here, I've got one ball back of the center, so that would be B1 or back 1 on the grid. And I've also got B2 or back 2 balls on the grid. And for me, that's about as far back as you'd ever want to play your fairway woods or your hybrids. My prescription would be something like B1 for the 3-wood, so just behind that lead shoulder, just behind the center of the swing, and B2 for the hybrid, sorry. So this would be a 3 hybrid, similar to how you'd play a longer iron. And that's another question I get asked a lot. Hybrids, are they like woods or are they like irons? I think in terms of setup and swing, they are more like an iron, to be honest with you. And by playing the ball slightly further back with the hybrid, we're encouraging a little bit more of a downward hit, which we'd want with an iron as well. So ball position B1 or back 1 for the fairway wood, which would be just behind the lead shoulder, and then B2 or back 2 if you're going to hit the hybrid. So for the purpose of this video, let me share with you what my student did today in his lesson. I'll go through his swing shortly. Before I do, I'll just talk you through what happened here, give you an understanding of the importance of ball position, not just from the face-on view to control that low point or the contact, but also from this down the line view to control and influence the path of the swing. Many times golfers who play the ball too far back in their stance, so maybe I've got this now back 3 or even back 4 in my stance, much closer to the center of my stance here, I might be building in the likelihood of making reasonably solid contact by encouraging myself to hit down. But if I start hitting down too much, that can have negative ramifications as well. But what I'm also doing, and was particularly true of a student that I was working with on the course on Friday and also this morning, he starts to swing, it affects the path, you start to swing too much into out. And we know from previous conversations about swing path that the path of your swing doesn't just dictate the direction and the shape of your shot, although clearly it has a big influence. What it does, as much as anything, and especially with these longer clubs, is it starts to influence the low point and put the bottom of the swing in the wrong place. So as I move this ball further and further back on the grid, I'm going to swing more into out, okay, which becomes a point where that is not good and not beneficial, and it encourages my low point to happen far too far back on the ground, far too early. And even if I did make good contact, and this was very true of the student I'm referring to, even if you did make good contact from back here, tend to hit extremely sort of straight pushes to the right, so quite a long way offline to the right, or if you managed to make the ball curve back towards the target, there was a lot of curve. So these balls became very difficult to control, start direction and the curve, and ultimately where they finished. So there's not a great deal of joy in having a swing path that's so extremely to the right, or for that matter that starts coming across the ball and gets extremely to the left. So the precision of this ball position, the importance of the ball position, increases as you go up the bag and get to the top end. Down in the wedges and the shorter irons, you can get away with some variation in ball position because of the additional loft you have on the club. But once you get to the longer clubs, once you get to the fairway woods, you really got to start to put that ball in the same spot almost every single time to allow you to produce more of a consistent path into the ball, which also increases the likelihood of the low point being where it should be. So let me hit one to demonstrate what I mean. I've got this ball too far back for a fairway wood. Got it probably 4 balls back on the grid there. Let me try and hit one and see what happens. So big push, draw, ball coming back towards the target. It's a decent enough shot, but I'll tell you that I had a lot of curve on it, and managing that on the golf course would not be something I'd be too keen to do. Also, the further back in the stance I put the ball, the lower the ball flight. That ball's very, very low flight. As I say, too much curve and just really difficult to control if I was coming into a par 5 second shot, long par 4, very long par 3. I might choose to use a fairway wood, or you might choose to use a fairway wood. You're never going to stop the ball on the green when it's coming in that flat. So 9 degrees into out swing path, that's just too much, okay? And that's from having the ball so far back in my stance. Let me put it up to that B1 position where it's just behind the center or the lead shoulder, the center of the swing, and see what we get. That one felt great. Very, very, very straight, tight draw. It's carried about another 10, 15 yards. It's gone 246 yards. Very solid, very little curve on the ball. And the trajectory is almost double the height. Path, 1.2 degrees into out. Perfectly controlled low point. Straighter swing because I'm hitting it later before the ball reaches the tangent or before the club reaches that low point. but as the delay the hit and hit later and later and later, and I make contact and closer to the lead shoulder or the tangent, the swing path is straighter. If I pull this ball position back too far, if I was to do an extreme version just to show you, now I've got this ball right back, almost on my back foot, way behind the lead shoulder. To make contact with that ball, I've got to swing so much more from the inside, which messes up the low point and, as we've seen, massively changes the path of the swing. So to go from 9 degrees into out to 1 degree into out just by changing my ball position, you can use this trick in your own setup to manipulate and change the swing path that you need to do. For example, if you're someone who swings too much out to in, you might have the ball too far forward. Let's say you've got to the position where now you've got the ball too far up on your stance. In order to hit that ball, you're having to swing so much from out to in. I'll demonstrate one of those. Not my best strike. I don't really like having the ball that far forward. That wasn't particularly pretty. A little bit of a slice to the right, weak shot, wouldn't be too happy with that, but the demonstration purpose for that was to show you that by having the ball in the wrong place, I can actually be swinging out to in. That was 10 degrees out to in. So by moving my ball position from, let's say, back 3 or 4, maybe 5, having it just behind the center there at that B1 position, and then moving it forward, let's say up 2 or 3 on the grid, I've changed the swing path there by almost 20 degrees. I've gone from 9 degrees into out when it was back here, 1 degree into out when it was here, and 10 degrees out to in when it's forward. If you don't think the location of the ball position, it matters, hopefully this video will make you think again. So let's take a look at the real life example I was referring to earlier on. This is my lesson from today. Student I played with on Friday demonstrated quite a strong push pattern with all the clubs, had the ball a bit too far back, and really struggled to control the low point with these longer clubs from the ground, and was really reluctant to use them. In fact, admitted as much, it doesn't even take his 3-wood out on the golf course when it's a fairway shot, just maybe sometimes takes the hybrid, or often just drops back to the 5-iron, which really limits how far this person can hit their second shot, their approach shots on long par 4s, par 5s. So it's really, inhibiting their ability to play good golf. Great swing, really improving this student, doing a hell of a job, but just needed some tweaks with this ball position and to help him with the contact and the path. So just as per my explanation on the mat, just having a look at where that golf ball is positioned on the left-hand side there relative to the lead shoulder, you can see that it's 1, 2, 3, maybe 3.5 balls back. So it's really starting to creep into that territory of being a bit too far back. And it's important to note that I'll say that there's a specific ball position that you need to find for these clubs, but that's relative to you and your swing pattern. I'm not saying that everyone has to put the ball in exactly the same place for a 3-wood or a hybrid. It's not the case. In this player's case, tendency to push and overdraw, had the ball too far back, made the path push too far out to the right. So the point here would be that the further back in his stance this ball is, the further back on that grid it is, so the more of that it's sitting back on that angle, the more that the path of the swing is going out to the right for too long. Okay, that's what he was experiencing. So the improvement here came about really just through a discussion around ball position, where he's now got the ball 1.5 balls back of that center. And the results were pretty immediate and fairly astounding in terms of strike improvement and reduction in curve. So we'll talk through some of the numbers. The most important number, I suppose, for most of you will be the distance. So there was an increase in carry of 30 yards with the same club. This is a 3 hybrid. And the ball speed improved dramatically because the contact improved, and I'll show you that in just a second. Other things that really improved, which I think were all expected based on the change that we made, but aren't always necessarily most obvious things that you would think, but the height of the shot doubled. So the height went from a 17 yard peak height in the air, 34 peak height in the air. That's an enormous difference, brought about partly through quality of strike, or a big part through quality of strike, but also through swinging less to the right, so not hooking the ball as much. And to that point, this last tile that I'll pull onto the screen is discussing or describing the amount of curve, or the amount of, in this case, the amount of draw spin. So the higher the number there, the more shape there would have been to the shot. And we had a conversation both on the course and in the bay about how limiting shaping the ball too much with these clubs is. So even if he does make good contact, the height wasn't high enough, so coming into a long par 3, long par 4, long par 5, trying to hit that approach shot over trouble and have the ability for it to stop quickly just wasn't something that was in his toolkit, and was once again very restrictive in terms of his scoring. You start hitting the ball 222 yards with a 34-yard peak height, the ball's coming down, it's going to stop very quickly. That immediately improves your chances of hitting the ball closer to the hole and ultimately shooting lower scores. And just lastly, from a down the line perspective, just two things to show you, mostly for the really well-trained eye out there, because these differences are relatively subtle, but we have gone from what was a 9-degree into out path on the left, which was similar to how I hit my shot when I put the ball too far back in my stance, to a 2-degree path on the right. So very significant and similar change to the one that I made. On the 2D camera, you won't always see it super clear. I will point out what I'm looking at, and it can help you educate your eyes a little bit to see what you might look for if you have this problem. Just drawn in the shaft plane there, and the golfer on the left is going to demonstrate swinging a little bit too far from the inside, which we would see by virtue of the fact that the shaft of the golfer here gets a little bit, I'm sorry, let me do that one more time. The shaft of the golfer here gets a little bit under his forearm, and in this P6 position, which we've referenced before, you'll see how the club head is quite a little bit underplaying there in its journey back to the ball. So that sweet spot staying a little bit too much under the plane is part of the demonstration here of that swing going too far to the right. And what you'll see there, as we zoom in on the strike, you can see how poor the strike was, the heel strike, which was a big part of why he didn't like using these clubs. Okay, he wouldn't hit the center of the club face very often, and when he did, he wouldn't hit it high enough, would shape it too much. So similar kind of changes made in this swing to the one I made through making a relatively simple, relatively small adjustment to that ball position. If we go back and take a look at the golfer on our right hand side, this is the ball position more forwards. I said these changes are going to be subtle, so keep your eyes peeled. Now the shaft is on the forearm, okay, rather than being below it. Just redraw that in, a little bit different. And then as the golfer traces the shaft plane a little closer into the ball, you'll notice how the club head stays closer to the red line. That ultimately is a straighter swing path and straighter exit also in terms of the club coming around the corner. That was a perfectly struck shot, absolutely out the center. Just take a look at that. So there's the perfect centered contact that we'll be looking for rather than the heel strike. So changes that I encourage because I think I could see where this needed to go, and a relatively easy win for this player. And I've seen this change a lot by using the grid, using your understanding of the ball position on the arc to change the low point location, the swing direction, then ultimately just improve your ball striking. So having watched the video, I hope you found it useful. I would summarize things by saying that there's fairly specific ball positions that you need to figure out for these clubs. The margin for error is less than it is with an iron, and less than it is with a driver in many respects, because the ball is on the ground for these clubs rather than being teed up. I also think you really should consider whether having a 3-wood or a very strong lofted hybrid in your bag is actually helping your game or not. The best way to figure that out is to get yourself fitted down at your local GOLFTEC center or a local golf store. They should be able to show you, using technology, whether or not the gaps that you have, the lofts that you have, and the clubs that you're using are actually helping you. As I say, that I very seldom see players who are using a 3-wood to any degree of benefit at all. I think it's probably one of the least used clubs, one of the least useful clubs in the bag, particularly when it comes to hitting it from the ground. So give that some consideration. If you've maybe noticed that your fairway wood gapping or your hybrid gapping really isn't very different, or that maybe you hit your lofted fairway wood, your 5 wood, better than you do your 3 wood, there's probably a reason for that. And if you go and get yourself fitted professionally, I think you might be able to fill those gaps much more effectively. As always guys, thanks for watching the video today. I hope you found it useful. Please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Plenty of other stack and tilt related content and other golf videos that I think you'll find very, very useful for your game. So if you're not already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, like the video, and feel free to share it with your golfing buddies if you think it would help them too. That's it for today. Let me know what you thought down in the comments. And until next week, guys, take care, have a great week, and I'll see you again very soon.